And Chair Foster will be joining us shortly. I don't believe he's online yet. Member Halinga?
Present.
Member Houston? I see her. She looks like she's frozen. Member Grail?
Here.
And Member Johnson?
I'm here.
Member Kaywall?
Present.
Member McKenzie? Member Rapley?
I'm here. My video may not be.
Member Shurton?
Present.
Member Smith?
Yes.
I have regrets from Member Steele, Member Woodhouse,
Present.
and Member Wright,
Present.
and of course, Chair Metcalf. We have 14 members in attendance. We have quorum.
Thank you, Grant. I'd like to acknowledge the Niagara Peninsula watershed is situated within the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Atchinawanak, Neutral, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, many of whom continue to live and work here today. The territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, number 3, 4, and 381, and is within the land protected by the Dish and Spoon Wampum Treaty Agreement. Today, the watershed is home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Through the 2021-2031 strategic plan, we reconfirm our commitment to shared stewardship of natural resources and deep appreciation of Indigenous culture, history in the watershed. First off, could I have approval of the agenda? Moved by Member Houston, second. Member Ingrayo. Thank you. Declarations of conflict of interest. Seeing none, and we're just going to move approval of the minutes. Member Woodhouse, second by Member Fiore. Thank you. Bear with me a second here. So we're going to skip right into presentations. We have someone waiting here. And I believe the first one up is 6B. It would be the PowerPoint presentation by Karen Wayanecki. Is Karen here?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Sorry, Chair. Chair Metcalf, can we have our guest presentation first on the VAST program, and then we can deal with the...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I thought this was going to be the order.
Yeah, sorry. And Jeff Vercade will introduce the presenter.
Okay, we'll go ahead with that then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, members of the board, and through you, Chair Metcalf. I'd like to introduce to you today Greg Ford, who is the Executive Director of the Niagara Coastal Collaborative Community, which is typically branded as Niagara Coastal. Greg is also the National Director of Water Programs with Swim, Drink, and Fish Canada. And his passions, his work, and his hobbies all evolve around the waters of the Great Lakes, where he strives to conserve, restore, and protect these waters. He's going to be sharing with you about the VAST system that we developed in partnership between the Coastal Collaborative and the Conservation Authority with Great Lakes Local Action Funding money last year from the province, where we reached out to the Coastal Collaborative, appreciating their organization of the community on the north shore of Lake Erie with respect to doing something towards shoreline resiliency and partnering towards this longer term. So I'll hand it over to Greg now.
Thank you, Mr. Vercade, and good morning, members of the board.
I'm just going to share my screen really quickly, and I hope that this works. And it looks like it does. So I'm pleased to be here today to present to you our findings from the inaugural year of the Visual Assessment Survey Tool Program, or the VAST program, which, as Mr. Vercade indicated, was a Great Lakes Local Action Fund project run in partnership between the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, Niagara College Canada, and the Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative. On behalf of the Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative, I'm Gregory Ford, our Executive Director, and I will be pleased to present to you some of the results from our inaugural year. As we get into it, I would like to first introduce you to the Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative, also called Niagara Coastal. We are a collective approach to environmental governance that brings together ENGOs, educational institutes, citizen groups, and municipal, provincial, and federal governments, all with a common agenda of optimizing and expanding local capacity and action to build a healthy and resilient Lake Erie coastal ecosystem. We recognize that a healthy Lake Erie supports the community's economic, recreational, spiritual, and environmental needs. So effectively speaking, we're a group of groups, and we are guided by the principles of the collective impact model. In operating under the collective impact model, we use a management cycle that we developed called the Collaborative Stewardship Action Framework. This cycle was developed to identify and address data gaps on Lake Erie and allow the community of practice to more efficiently work together. All of our initiatives are designed to fit into this cycle, starting with some brokering of some knowledge, leading to community-based monitoring, which then inform local actions, the results of which all go back into our ongoing brokering of knowledge about the Great Lakes in Niagara and elsewhere. To accomplish these, we operate 4 major initiatives, all of which are powered by the community of citizen scientists that we have here in the Niagara region. First, we started the collaborative back in 2017 by providing a collective forum for knowledge brokering about Great Lakes issues and how we can work together to address some of them. In 2019, we started what was known as the Lake Erie Niagara Community Water Monitoring Hub. This is a community-based water monitoring initiative that goes out to beaches across the Niagara shoreline that are currently unmonitored, collects water quality information, and shares that with the public. And this was run in partnership with Swim Drink Fish Canada. And this last year, in 2021, we launched 2 new initiatives. First, the Visual Assessment Survey Tool to monitor shoreline changes across the Great Lakes, and the results of which informed our nature-based shoreline solutions initiative, where we've started to implement some of these nature-based solutions across the shoreline here in Niagara. But for today, of course, I'll be talking about the Visual Assessment Survey Tool. So the Visual Assessment Survey Tool, or VAST, engages people from all areas of life and backgrounds. It's a tool that's designed to engage coastal citizens, community groups, and other local organizations in collecting data to fill knowledge gaps on the shorelines of the Great Lakes. This data collection can be completed anytime and from anywhere along the shoreline. The information that we gather can be used to advocate for policy changes, guide coastal management decisions, and identify the need for local actions that communities can take to improve their shorelines. The importance of coastal monitoring is well known. However, oftentimes coastal managers like the Npca can at times lack the capacity to visit all of the sites that they manage under their jurisdiction at regular intervals to monitor ongoing changes. So by leveraging citizen science, more frequent monitoring of sites can be achieved. In doing so, we task citizen scientists with completing surveys to observe changes to the coast over time. We take standardized photos, and we correlate all of this information with regular aerial drone flights and drone surveys of these locations, which are then combined to create what we call the Great Lakes Coastal Monitoring Network. To contribute to this network, participating citizen scientists are encouraged to visit their favorite shorelines, take a few photos with their smartphone, answer a survey about the conditions that they're seeing, and submit that data to us through our platform. Using this crowdsourced data collection approach provides more real-time data and allows a greater volume of data to be collected compared to traditional management techniques. This data is then uploaded to our VAST Explore map platform, which creates that ever-expanding, near real-time coastal monitoring network on the Great Lakes. Members of the public can visit this platform to see the conditions along the shoreline and make informed decisions about where and how they use the shorelines of the Great Lakes. Coastal managers can access this data to more proactively manage the shorelines under their authority. As an adaptive management coastal decision support tool, VAST helps to substantiate the shifting trends of our shorelines by providing evidence. So decisions and actions taken as a result of VAST data collection will aid in improving ecosystem health. So we monitor a few things through this program in the first year, and the first of which was Glidophor Algae, which was an expansion of our existing monitoring activities. Glidophor Algae has been an ongoing issue for the Great Lakes, particularly here in Niagara in the eastern basin of Lake Erie. It's a priority issue flagged in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and although it's non-toxic, Glidophor algae is considered a nuisance that poses threats to human and wildlife health. As the algae washes on shore, it can form dense rotting mats in places, and this can encourage the growth of harmful bacteria, which depletes oxygen levels in the surrounding area. And beyond that, it's also unsightly and it's smelly, and it really dissuades people from using the beach. In Niagara region, this is actually one of the reasons that a beach may be posted as unsafe for swimming. Next up, we started tracking coastal erosion. It's well recognized as a concern for coastal ecosystem health and human property and life. And although Environment Canada has recently made strides to quantify the impacts, to date, formal agreements and targets have not been set regarding erosion on the Great Lakes. Severe storm events and record high water levels, particularly in the last 3 years, have contributed heavily to erosion along our shorelines, with dunes eroding, bluffs collapsing, and houses being at risk. With a better understanding of locations along the shoreline that are eroding, we can take actions to proactively stabilize to provide protection for property and for habitat for wildlife. With this erosion survey module, citizen scientists go out, they estimate the size of the erosive area and take other observations like, are there exposed roots, is there vegetation collapse, and are there cliffs that have suddenly appeared? Finally, we developed the Aesthetic Beach Quality Survey, which is based on the guidelines for Canadian recreational water quality. Information collected from these surveys can provide an assessment for existing and potential water quality hazards and the associated public health risks. This information can be aiding in completing environmental health and safety surveys, which are known as the blueprint for designing and implementing an effective risk management strategy for recreational waters. Additionally, data collected from this survey can be used to inform areas of where there are beaches that are in need of community cleanups so that we can help to clean up our shoreline together. The initiative launched in the early summer of 2021 and has seen steady increases in the number of surveys submitted until the end in mid-December. To date, we have trained over 50 volunteer citizen scientists who have contributed over 534 hours of their time on the shoreline with us, taking around 400 surveys and sharing 1,900 photos of the Great Lakes. Importantly, this data has been accessed almost 1,500 times, including by coastal managers like the Npca and Environment Canada. The project was extremely well received by the media, resulting in 10 unique print features and 3 produced videos. We engaged over 17 different organizations in the program, and we're honored to attend binational Let's Talk Lake Ontario webinar series, and we intend to speak at the upcoming Lake Erie Partnership webinars as well. Here I do have a couple of videos, but it looks like I did only have 10 minutes to talk, so I will breeze through these quite quickly. Generally, you'll see here, I'll just mute this really quickly. This is how we run the program. You can see this is a standardized photo. It's going to shift through a couple of photos here, and you can see just how the shoreline can change over time based on where our volunteers are taking the photos and when they take them. And so this is an example just showing some algae. We substantiate this on the ground surveys with aerial drone UAV surveys, where we can assess from the air the concentration of algae as well. Of course, almost more importantly is the shoreline erosion. And so this is an example at Nickel Beach in the city of Port Colborne, where there was already an eroding shoreline, especially over the last 3 years with the high wind, wave, and water levels. And that led to some extreme collapses of the shoreline here, where you can see that lots of the vegetation has been lost over time. Actually, really in just one storm event on December 11th of 2021. And with this, we can start to quantify the amount of sediment lost from the storm as well. And so as we identified these issues, particularly shoreline erosion, we were presented with an opportunity to leverage our vast volunteer network, if you'll pardon the pun. We used our volunteers to implement some local actions to address these changing conditions. Particularly of interest, in late 2021, we started transplanting local genetic stock of beach grass on certain key priority shoreline areas to reduce shoreline erosion and increase shoreline resiliency. This work was conducted in partnership with the Npca, who had staff and resources on hand to assist with the restoration work. We did see some incredible success. Although some of the restoration projects were negatively impacted by the December storms last year, many of the restored ecosystems saw signs of growth or resilience in the face of record high water levels. This is particularly evident at Bay Beach. And so this is one of the first restoration sites we planted in partnership with Niagara College back in April 2021. You can see the photo here, before restoration, after restoration, and you can see that there's a staggering amount of sediment accumulation on that site after the December 11th storm, allowing dune regeneration to occur. Here's a couple of photos of our incredible volunteers with some of the Npca staff on site. And in the just 1.5 months of restoration work we were able to conduct in 2021, we managed to plant over 1,500 beach grass plugs across 7 sites on the Lake Erie shoreline. This restored 2,500 square meters of habitat by installing 200 meters of sand fencing, all of which we had the help of 34 volunteers who spent a total of 102 hours with us on the shore. And so we have a number of next steps in front of us at the Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative. We were successful in applying for funding from the Federal Eco Action Community Fund, which has left us with some project funding to conduct additional shoreline restoration projects throughout 2022 into 2023. And so in doing so, we will be working with both the Npca and Niagara College to implement some of these projects. And of course, while we're doing this, we will be expanding the VAST program to include additional modules, including a restoration project success module that allows us to track how successful our restoration work on the shoreline and off the shoreline has been over time, including vegetation strike rate, sediment accumulation, and things of that nature. And we've engaged the services of a technological consultant who has developed a plan for VAST, which includes things like creating a custom platform, developing an AI that will allow us to track changes in the photographs and shorelines over time, and a whole suite of other improvements. And so I'll stop the presentation here, but I want to direct your attention to the link at the bottom of the slide. Our public-facing report, VAST 2021, A Year in Review, is a story map that takes you through the entire project and dives deeply into all of the things I couldn't get into today. I also wanted to use this opportunity to thank some of the incredible voices who lend their support to this project. First, I wanted to thank Kirsten McCutcheon, Tessa Anderson, and David Meeker, as well as Jeff Vercade for their tireless work on making this project a success. And I wanted to thank the entire Npca board and staff for partnering with us to deliver this project to the province of Ontario. It was extremely well received, and we're really excited to continue working on this together. So thank you all for your attention this morning, and that culminates my presentation for the day.
Thank you, Gregory. That was great information and a great presentation. Are there any questions for Gregory at this time? Take some questions. Oh, Member Fiore, I see your hand up, and go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. No question, just a comment to congratulate Gregory and his team on the excellent work that they're doing. Wonderful to see how the Coastal Collaborative has evolved over the years. So keep up the good work. It's important, and I'm glad the addition of the erosion, because that's been quite significant. Thank you.
Through the chair, it's Bill Rapley. I just want to say this is a fantastic program, and I'm really pleased to see it all happening. Now, when you are doing this, do you record any species that you see? For instance, if there were fowlers, toads, or if there was snakes or anything of interest? Is that part of it?
Yes, that is part of it. Particularly as part of our aesthetic beach quality survey, we do ask respondents to compile a list of all of the species that they see. That is not something that we generally share publicly, particularly when there are species at risk like the fowler's toad. But if they are seen, we do have a record of them.
So that would be really useful information to have. And And you've also, have you done the Shoreline Park in Niagara on the Lake, which is mostly under Parks Canada?
If you are referring to Niagara Shores, we have been looking into Niagara Shores a little bit more, particularly bringing some of our other programming to that location as well, because it does seem like it is unmonitored. And that is something that I was hoping to bring to the attention of the Npca board at a later date.
Yeah, it's of great interest to us. I'm in Niagara on the Lake, but the birders and the future of having a park there, we have a harmony group and so on. So it would be, if you're getting information that might be useful later on, as we work with Parks Canada and the region and NOTL and the Npca, of course, comes up to the Lakeshore Drive there. But it's a great interest to a lot of us, and we hope to get going again with this project now that COVID may allow us, in theory. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bill. I have Member Hewson, and then I think I see Member Smith's hand up next, and then Member Halinga. So, Member Hewson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just want to share the same sentiments as Member Fiore. I was really excited to see this. It looks like fascinating work. I'm excited the Npca gets to be a part of delivering this program. Is this, I guess I do have a question. Is this an ongoing project, or are we reporting on the conclusion of an initiative?
So at this point, we have culminated the inaugural year. So the Great Lakes Local Action Funding was for the 2021 year, although the Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative will be continuing the VAST program through Eco-Action community funding, as well as additional funding sources moving forward. And we're very hopeful to continue to work with the Npca over the years as this program develops.
I have nothing but positive things to say. Very exciting to see this. Thank you very much for sharing it with us today.
Member Hewson, Member Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, hey, Gregory, that was a great presentation. I just, I'm wondering, you had said it was Lake Erie. Any plans for Lake Ontario?
So that brings up a great point. So our initial scope was for the Lake Erie North Shore in Niagara. And without even targeting other areas, other geographies, the uptake was pretty phenomenal. We ended up with surveys coming in on 3 of the Great Lakes, particularly Lake Ontario and Niagara. There was a lot of interest. And so it is the intention of the Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative to both expand the VAST program and expand our community-based water monitoring, as well as our restoration work and just all of our initiatives across the board to include the Lake Ontario geography in Niagara as well.
Beautiful. Congratulations on your efforts.
Thank you, Member Smith. Member Halinga, I believe, was up next.
Thank you, Chair, and my congratulations also to Greg. This is not the first time I have sat in on one of Greg's presentations, including at NCCC meetings. And just Greg, could you indicate how creeks and the Grand River, other outlets to the lakes, and the municipal drains have an impact on Lakeshore?
Yeah, that's something that I can get into. There are quite a number of impacts that our inland waters have on our Great Lakes. Most pressing, of course, is nutrient loading. So, you know, nutrients are just a fact of life, but oftentimes in certain tributaries, we can have excessive nutrient loads that come into Lake Erie. This is particularly problematic for the nuisance Glidophor algae. Glidophor algae, phosphorus is known as the limiting nutrient to algal growth. And so when we have excessive phosphorus loads being input into the Lake Erie North Shore, we result in eutrophication conditions, which lead to an explosion of algae. It's particularly problematic because in Niagara, nuisance Glidophor algae has been linked to both botulism outbreaks, the breeding of E. coli bacteria, and is responsible for probably 25% of all beach closures that we see in the region. And so it's something that we want to try and control. The Niagara Coastal Community Collaborative is doing some expanded monitoring for phosphorus. We've actually worked in partnership with the Npca on this before with Josh Diamond to identify key tributaries that are contributing to excessive phosphorus and excessive algae, particularly in Lorain Bay and the Ski Port Holdering.
Thank you, and that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Member Halinga. Are there any more questions for Gregory? Gregory, thank you for your presentation. Excellent work. I see a lot of the, on your map there, a lot of the north shore of Erie area is covered. And I see that Member Foster has joined us now, so I will relinquish my duties as chair. Pass to the real chair.
Oh, thank you, John, and you're doing a great job. I think you should be continuing on for the rest of the meeting, and I'll just sit in the background for the rest of it, if that works out for you. Morning, everybody, and I do apologize for being late. I was at the politicians' breakfast here in the town of Lincoln, and they decided to take my picture at 9:05. So, and as you know, a politician has to get their picture taken. So, those some things sometimes happen. So, just through to Grant and to John, you've been through presentation A. We're to move on to presentation B, I assume.
You can when you see this presentation as well. We seconder for it.
Sorry, Grant, I didn't really hear that.
My apologies. We just need a mover and seconder to receive this presentation. You can move on to item B if there are no more questions or discussion with respect to this matter.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So mover and seconder. So Councillor Houston move. Councillor Smith, would you second, please? Anybody opposed to us accepting that? Seeing none, let's move on to our next presentation, which is a PowerPoint presentation by Carrie Wienecke, the Director of Practice Planning and Solutions. Karen, or first of all, Chandra, do you want to lead into this particular item?
Thank you, Chair Foster. Yes, good morning. Can everybody mute themselves because there's a lot of feedback? Thank you. Okay. So I just want to take a minute to introduce our speaker and also provide some context. Board direction around the importance and urgency of this project to update our planning and permitting policies is absolutely clear to staff. And we are diligently working to develop technically grounded and defensible policies that position us to address the upcoming challenges for growth, not just for next year, but we're talking the next decade with urbanization and intensification and climate change impacts in the Niagara region. So last year, staff completed an internal review which has been significantly augmented by our consultants' independent expert review. So with the completion of phase 1, we're now moving forward with a very aggressive timeline for phase 2 of this project. Now, given the critical gaps and inconsistencies identified around policy areas pertaining to buffers and wetlands, we've also built in an interim measure to expedite work on these policies and procedures over the next few months and seek governance committee input and board approval as appropriate as we move through this process. Finally, I also want to ensure you that irrespective of this policy update, Npca staff team is solid currently with extensive experience. We are doing a very thorough job in providing the much needed rigor in carrying out our planning and permitting mandate. With that, I would like to hand it over to Ms. Wienecke of Planning Solution, and Director Yates, our consultant, will walk you through her findings, and Director Yates will then talk about the report and next step that is in front of you on the agenda. Just to introduce our presenter, and how much experience she brings to the table to help us do this work. Karen is a professional planner, facilitator, and mediator. She has spent a major part of her career working in public service, reviewing development applications, writing policies, coordinating committees of the cabinet, and developing a provincial wetland policy. Karen has also worked with the government at all levels. She has municipal experience, industries, conservation authorities. So I'm really pleased that Karen, when we reached out to you, you agreed to do this work for us and guide us through this process with our staff team, which includes myself, Director Yates, David DeLuce, our senior manager, and Sarah Mascheroni, who is also a senior planner with Npca. Thanks a lot, and over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much. May I just do a sound check this morning to make certain that you can all hear me without any difficulty? I'm assuming that I am coming across loud and clear. Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you very much. And so appreciate the opportunity to connect with you this morning, and also the introduction, Chandra. The thanks indeed come from me. I'm not going to keep anybody in suspense. I have 29 slides to share with you. I speak relatively quickly, and so I will present to you an overview of the phase 1 work and the report findings. And Leilani is going to advance the slides on my behalf. And so next slide, please. So looking at the scope of work, when I was retained to undertake phase 1, I was invited to do a couple of things. First, to review the current Npca policy document to identify gaps, deficiencies, inconsistencies, etc., and to undertake a comparative analysis between Npca's policies and other high-growth Greater Golden Horseshoe conservation authorities. To recommend technical studies and/or mapping gaps to support the new policy development, documents development, and to make a recommendation for a 7-month work plan to advance phase 2. Next slide, please. And so when I began this work, I would like to present you with what I found in terms of those needed updates, gaps, inconsistencies, and deficiencies, and what I also found in terms of the comparative analysis that we undertook when we looked at the other comparators, the other Greater Golden Horseshoe conservation authorities. And some of the questions that I asked myself in carrying out this work is, how does your document, current document, compare in general with other policy manuals? Is it outdated? Does it contain outdated policies and references? Are there policies in the document that are not clear and that require clarity? Are there gaps? Is there a misalignment or an inconsistency or inconsistencies between the policies in your document, within the document? And at the same time, are there inconsistencies or misalignment with policies that are in place in other conservation authorities, etc., and at the municipal level? And is there a misalignment, importantly, with other conservation policies under review regarding wetland and natural heritage buffers? Next slide, please. So phase 1 really focused on an internal review. There wasn't public consultation in phase 1. It is anticipated that extensive public engagement will occur in phase 2. And so the methodology that we used really focused in 3 different areas. We conducted an online survey, as many of you will be aware, and invited members of the Npca Board of Directors, municipal planning partners, and PAC members to participate in that online survey. We conducted one-on-one interviews with Npca staff and management, as well as municipal partners, and we undertook a detailed and comprehensive look and jurisdictional review at the other Greater Golden Horseshoe conservation authorities including Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, Conservation Halton, Credit Valley, the Grand, Lake Simcoe region, Hamilton, and Toronto and region. You'll see an asterisk beside the last conservation authority that is listed, and that is Kawartha. And the reason I looked at those policies was because I was very actively involved in assisting Kawartha in writing their policy document. I've written others, but Kawartha has done an extensive amount of work in engaging with stakeholders and with the agricultural sector in particular. And the document that emerged in developing their policy manual was really utilized by many other conservation authorities who were updating their document. Next slide, please. So the report that was submitted as part of phase 1 contains 92 pages, 8 chapters, and 3 appendices. There are 47 recommendations in the document. And in terms of structure, we provided first an overall assessment of the current document, its structure, orientation, and format. We looked at content from the lens of gaps, deficiencies, and inconsistencies. And then we did a deep dive into that other jurisdictional review from the lens of comparative policy analysis. And in particular, we looked at the policies that have been assigned to conservation authorities under Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act, and then the plan review responsibilities that are assigned to CAs under the Planning Act. Presented a summation of the survey results, some general findings, and an assessment and recommended work plan for phase 2 to identify where to from here. Next slide, please. Critically, what did we find? So I want to be very clear. This work focused on how the policies are written. It did not focus on how the policies are implemented. And in addition, it involved a review of policy documents that are readily available to anybody on the website. Did not involve contacting conservation authorities and asking what may be available elsewhere. It looked at what was readily available on site. And so critically, we undertook a comparative analysis, but also a comprehensive review. And what you will find as we move forward in the presentation very generally, but importantly, is that the Npca policies meet the intent of the PPS, the Provincial Policy Statement, and the 5 tests of a conservation authority. Next slide, please. So in terms of overall assessment, what did we find? Next slide, please. As you likely know, your current policies were approved in 2018 and amended in 2019 and 2020. The current document presents both policies for plan review and permitting together. So the dual responsibilities assigned to a CA are presented together. And there is a recommendation in the document that speaks about whether or not Npca moving forward may wish to think about presenting those separately, and I will share that information with you. The title of the document references the Planning Act, but the Conservation Authority responsibilities go well beyond that. There is no land acknowledgement, and there's a recommendation, and R refers to recommendation. The document begins with, or commences rather, with an assessment and a reference to the living landscape. It may be more helpful to begin the document when you update it with a statement of purpose, as well as the intended audience, because the document is utilized by staff and certainly by board members, but by municipal staff, members of the public, etc. And it should also reference key partners that Npca works with. There is a reference in the document to some of those partners, but the Niagara Parks Commission, for example, is not referenced. And so I just highlight that as well. Again, a reference and a recommendation to that effect. It should be easy to read, it should be easy to navigate, and there may be an opportunity to simplify the way in which some of those policies are presented, as well as utilize the document from a communications lens. Next slide, please. Looking at legislative and policy references, what did we find? Next slide, please, Leilani. Thank you. We found that the document does contain outdated references to the Conservation Authorities Act, and we know that details regarding Section 28 regulations are continuing to unfold. Reference to the Provincial Policy Statement 2020, updates to the Niagara Escarpment Plan, updates to the Drainage Act, references to changes that have been made to the growth plan. There's now a reference to on-farm diversified uses, non-traditional uses, municipal-led watershed and sub-watershed planning, to name a few changes. Those should be reflected. There isn't a current reference, of course, because of the timing of the document, to the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act, and that suggests that there are additional sections which we will get into. And as well, there are evolving legislation and policies that are continuing to emerge. Notably, the Ontario Building Code, there are proposed changes, and they're in the middle of engaging and consulting on some of those, as well as the region. The region of Niagara official plan is being updated. Next slide, please. So in terms of some of the recommendations from a legislative and policy perspective, it's recommended in the document to update all legislative and policy references pertaining to conservation authorities, and those are listed. Update references to the Conservation Authority mandate, include a new section to address ministers' zoning orders, include additional references to new legislation and how these impact the Conservation Authority, cross-reference the Provincial Policy Statement, the Greenbelt Plan, and the Growth Plan to ensure alignment, consider the final region of Niagara environmental policies once they are approved, as well as any upper tier, single tier planning policies in phase 2, again, to ensure that there is alignment and consideration, and incorporate any memorandum of understanding updates, details, and protocols. Next slide, please. In terms of gaps, what did we find? Next slide, please. The document does not currently, as you will likely acknowledge, it does not currently reflect Npca's new 10-year strategic plan. Chandra made reference to the need for an emphasis on long-term policy considerations and forward thinking in light of climate change and building watershed resilience. And so a greater emphasis on climate change, cumulative impacts, a more prominent focus than is currently identified in the document. And then, as was noted, there are a number of specific policy gaps. Areas adjacent to Npca lands require policy articulation. Whether there's a need for a separate back dune area policy, changes in use, so upzoning, downzoning. There are some, and these are listed out just alphabetically. Definitions are missing and or require updating. Policies related to karst formations, a separate section on infrastructure, the mapping updates that are taking place. Next slide, please. Meander belt, mineral aggregates, and some policies do not include certain uses, decks, cantilevered overhangs, boardwalks, shoreline railways, replacement of derelict buildings, more fulsome policies as referenced earlier with respect to municipal drains. More fulsome policies are needed in the document. And importantly, situations involving more than one regulated area and the associated clarification regarding the constraints and policies that take precedence. So how do staff address those circumstances involving more than one regulated area? Next slide, please. Some of the recommendations include incorporating and making reference to NPCA's new 10-year strategic plan, updating general policy objectives and principles, updating demographics, and providing additional local watershed context, how the watershed is changing, and some of the challenges and threats that you see. A more prominent focus on climate change, opportunities, and examining opportunities for low impact development and green infrastructure. The review of all policies from the lens of cumulative impacts, and whether or not a standalone infrastructure section would be beneficial, and at the same time ensure that those are cross-referenced. The policies in that separate section, standalone section, are cross-referenced throughout the updated document. Next slide, please. Determine the need for a separate back dune policy. Reflect the work that NPCA is advancing from a mapping perspective. Address situations involving multiple regulated areas on one site. Review permitted and prohibited uses to ensure that all have been aptly captured so that nothing is missing. Address changes in use. Examine the growth plan as well as emerging upper tier, single tier official plan, intensification, densification policies to ensure that there is alignment, respecting infilling and include a definition, and more fulsome policies for municipal drains. Next slide, please. In terms of policy clarification and consistency, next slide, please. What did we find? The document itself is not a bad document. It has many good elements, and it is a good platform and a good foundation for moving forward with phase 2 and the update. But there are some ambiguous and vague terms. So in the floodplain policies, for example, it highlights one of the policies references uses prohibited in the floodplain. And one of those policies says any other uses deemed inappropriate. The removal of those vague and ambiguous terms would lend tremendous clarity. There are also policy, what I refer to as caveats. So policies prohibit development and site alteration, but then they are followed by a statement that indicates when, how, and under what conditions development may then be permitted to occur. That approach is not unlike other comparators who take a very flexible approach to policy articulation and development. But I did notice and wanted to raise that as an issue. Active and passive recreational uses need to be better defined. And valley land policies are challenging. They're challenging to understand just by virtue of the way they are formatted. And so there could be, the policies could be clarified looking at, and it's not just wording sometimes, it's the way in which those policies are presented. And the riverine erosion hazard, so the minimum erosion standard that's established by the province is 6 meters. NPCA has selected 7.5 meters. And so there is a recommendation in the report that NPCA determine the technical guidance and the policies for shoreline and riverine erosion and floodplain hazard management that are appropriate for your watersheds. Next slide, please. There are several policies in the current document that require internal alignment. So there there aren't a number. There are a few instances where overall policy requirements for particular features need to be consistent. And so if you look, for example, at shoreline access, 5.2.5 and 5.2.13. Those policies need to be consistent. So there is a requirement for a 5-meter shoreline allowance to access shoreline works. That is articulated in one section, but not in the other. And so it's making certain that there is a link and an alignment between those policies. Another area where policies need to be aligned is the wetlands policy areas. Those are difficult to understand simply because the policy intent, when you read them, may not be clear. So the policy reads, for example, no development and site alteration is permitted within 30 meters of a wetland. And then it says, reductions in the 30-meter requirement may be considered based on, and there are a series of conditions. And then it says no development is permitted within 5 meters of a wetland. So if you read those 3 statements, they don't seem to align. It's not clear what applies. Now, the reference to 5 meters was intended to apply to a very small set of conditions. It was intended to apply to situations where existing development abuts a wetland, you have a lawn area, and the landowner may want to construct an accessory building or structure. It was intended to say, even in those circumstances, Npca will not allow development or site alteration within 5 meters. That's the intent. And so in the policy update, it is very important to articulate, and will be very important to articulate, that policy intent. And so there are several areas in the current document that will require review and consideration. Next slide, please. It's recommended that the wetlands policies consequently be reviewed in phase 2. I made reference already to the format of the valley land policies. This particular issue that is raised here, the review of wetlands reconfiguration and compensation policies should be undertaken in phase 2. Wetlands and wetland buffers were identified in the survey as top of mind for those who responded, as well as top of mind in terms of the feedback that those who responded are receiving from others. This is an issue that is important. It's true that the region of Niagara are in the process of developing their official plan policies, but the reason a review of offsetting policies is important is because it's important for Npca. And so that is why it's recommended here. Updating procedures for development officers to align with new procedural directives and protocols will be important. Fill policies. In some areas of the policy document, it says up to 50 cubic meters of fill do not require a work permit. We need to make certain that the policy intent is consistent and clear throughout the document. And I also made reference already to the riverine erosion hazard. Next slide, please. So when we looked at some of the other comparators, what did we find? Next slide, please. We found that, as I mentioned in general and critically at the outset, the Npca policies appear to meet the intent of the provincial policy statement and the 5 tests of a conservation authority. That said, there is tremendous variation and very little consistency in the format, orientation, and structure of the policies and policy documents that we looked at with respect to the Greater Golden Horseshoe Conservation Authorities. Some CAs present only their policies only in terms of their permitting responsibilities. So Hamilton Conservation, Grand River, Lake Simcoe. In other cases, they present their policies in their manuals, but they have separate chapters for plan review and permitting. So TRCA, Central Lake Ontario, the Credit, Conservation Halton. And others present one document that combines those two dual or two responsibilities, like Niagara Peninsula. Some Greater Golden Horseshoe CAs have very detailed procedures manuals that provide clear direction to staff regarding policy implementation. In other cases, procedures manuals simply apply to process. They talk about the process, how applications are received, etc. Npca, as you know, lacks a procedural manual. Next slide, please. In addition, there is tremendous variation in the approach to policy and the level of policy detail across the Greater Golden Horseshoe CAs that were under review. Some are very prescriptive and direct, and others are more general. I'm not making any comment about which are better, but they have simply been developed by the CAs based on local context. There's also tremendous variation in terms of specified buffers and setbacks among the comparators. And that is evident when we look at watercourses, but it's evident when we look also at ANSIs and significant wildlife habitat, habitat of threatened and endangered species, woodlands, fish habitat, and the like. So those policies are extremely varied. And with respect to the responsibilities for natural heritage, ANSIs, significant wildlife habitats, threatened and endangered species, woodlands, and the like, other Greater Golden Horseshoe CAs include a proper reference and guidance with respect to natural heritage features that are under provincial and federal jurisdiction. Npca, the current document, does not include standalone policies or direction. Next slide, please. With respect to buffers, it's important to note that the provincial policy statement does not contain direct guidance related to ecological buffers. The Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, the Greenbelt Plan, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan all refer to buffers, to natural heritage features as vegetation protection zones, 30 meters on all significant or key natural heritage features outside settlement or urban areas. The Niagara Escarpment Plan does not include minimum buffer requirements, but it does include policies that relate to buffers and setbacks. The Conservation Authorities Act does not prescribe minimum buffers or prescribe setbacks from natural features. Conservation authorities take a number of factors into account in determining appropriate buffer requirements and setbacks. The area and the nature of the feature being protected, adjacent, anticipated land use or land uses, the function that the buffer is intended to perform, and the local context, so slopes and soils, surface drainage, groundwater conditions, and flows. There are a number of instances where conservation authorities have worked very closely. Central Lake Ontario offers a case in point, where they've worked very closely with their municipal partners to develop very solid vegetative buffer policies, both in local and regional official plans. When we looked at these documents, the comparators, there is an interchangeable reference to buffers and setbacks. And the same thing holds true with respect to your document. There's very little consistency in policy positioning and policy direction. And there are a range of factors, as mentioned, that are taken into account. I also think that it's important to note that the difference between buffers and setbacks. The buffer strip is a strip of vegetated land that separates development from environmentally sensitive areas and reduces the impact of human disturbance. Setbacks are a land use or a planning term that describe a minimum distance between any structure and a specified line. Setbacks can include ecological buffers, but they are distances from a fixed building, structure, infrastructure, and they're not necessarily vegetated. And the other point that I think is important to raise is that in the comparator documents, another term often appears, and that is adjacent lands. And so among the CAs under review, reference to adjacent lands, whether it's 50 meters, 120 meters, 30 meters, usually triggers an environmental impact study. Adjacent lands may include an ecological buffer, but their function is to allow the conservation authority in question to properly confirm the natural area boundary, feature boundaries, and assess potential impact or impacts to the natural area or areas. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at Npca's buffers. What did we find? The watercourse buffer policies appear to be more lenient than other Greater Golden Horseshoe CA policies because they reference 5 meters, and I can talk a little bit more about that. Npca requires a natural buffer between 15 meters and 10 meters based on a series of conditions. But the policies say reductions of those buffer requirements will only be considered in special circumstances based on a site evaluation by Npca to determine whether a reduction is warranted. In any case, no development is permitted within 5 meters of a watercourse. So they do appear, the watercourse buffers do appear more lenient. The Npca buffers, or even reference to ANSIs, woodlands, significant wildlife, habitat of threatened or endangered species, and fish habitat, there are no standalone policies in the current document. And that's largely because of the MOUs that you have in place. They are determined by watershed municipal partners, by the province, or by the federal government. And looking at an updated document, it would be, I believe it would be of benefit to consider whether some articulation of that would be helpful. The current document makes reference to environmental impact studies as a means of reducing specified setbacks. That's not dissimilar to other conservation authority. The biggest issue is the way in which the policies are worded. They offer or appear to offer a degree of flexibility, and perhaps as they were intended, to make decisions and determine the best approach based on the local context and subject to technical analysis and study. Next slide, please. In some cases, and I've referenced this before, Npca's policies are either contradictory or they appear to be contradictory or offer more flexibility, or appear to offer more flexibility than others. I've talked a little bit about the wetlands policies and the reference to, development is not permitted within 30 meters, and then the reductions can be considered, and then no development within 5 meters, and also the reference to water courses. I'm not certain if you wanted me to get into some level of detail around some of the other conservation authorities, but those are 2 examples. With respect to wetlands, the policies for Npca, they're complicated, they're complex, they're difficult to read, but they're not more difficult or more complicated than other conservation authorities. Lake Simcoe makes reference to unevaluated wetlands. They require a 30-meter setback. There are lots of really good examples and good practices in your document, and there are lots of good practices and good examples in others. And so perhaps without any further delay, perhaps I'll move forward. We can talk about some of those details. In terms of the buffers, what is recommended in the report is that a technical review be conducted to assess appropriate buffers to natural hazards, wetlands and watercourses across the Npca watershed that are grounded in science and best available guidance and data. Next slide, please. So moving forward, the report makes recommendations that Npca embark on a phase 2 initiative to review and update the policy document, and importantly, to develop an accompanying procedural manual. And it is certainly hoped that the phase 1 report will provide a solid platform for the phase 2 work. In phase 2, you'll have an opportunity through the work that will unfold to address the gaps and the inconsistencies, issues of policy clarity, whether or not valley land policies can and should be reformatted, the wetlands policies, the offsetting policies in general, watercourse policies, and to begin to look importantly at some of the other good procedural practices that are in place in other conservation authorities. At this time, that concludes the extent of the slide deck that I am presenting, but I would like to hand the floor over to Leilani Yates to outline the phase 2 policy review and a go-forward strategy. So Leilani, I'll mute my line without any further delay and transfer the floor to you.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. So following phase 1, staff are now immediately starting work on short-term tasks to improve clarity on EIS requirements and wetland policies, and to move expeditiously to develop policy options and recommendations. Through the phase 2 work plan, and based on the work that Karen has completed, staff will prepare an updated policy document and new procedural manual. This process will follow the Npca policy document amendment process that's identified in section 12.7 of the policy document, as well under the guidance of Conservation Ontario guidelines for policy development and updates. We'll report regularly to the Npca Governance Committee for advice and guidance. Our policy recommendations will consider draft policies from the upper tier and single tier municipal official plan reviews. We'll develop a robust engagement strategy to ensure community members, municipal partners, and stakeholders have the opportunity to provide input to the proposed policies. As Karen noted, we'll undertake necessary technical analysis and jurisdictional reviews to develop recommendations supported by science and best available data and information. We'll work with the governance committee to identify short, medium, and long-term tasks and timelines. And it is important to note that there will likely need to be additional policy updates after the Section 28 regulation is released by the province, likely later this year that we know of, or maybe early next year. So in terms of process, we'll start work immediately. We'll undertake the background research and analysis on buffer widths specific to the Npca watershed jurisdiction that will feed into policy recommendations. We'll develop a guideline that will provide the clarity to landowners, applicants, and consultants regarding our expectations and requirements for completing an EIS in support of a Section 28 work permit application. We'll also develop a wetland procedure document that will outline the process and study requirements for the identification, evaluation, study, protection, and enhancement of regulated wetlands. And both the EIS guideline and wetland procedure document will be brought to the Board of Directors for approval in May, with the intention that these documents will bring that much needed clarity and rigor to our review processes, interim to our policies being fully reviewed, amended, and a policy procedural manual being presented. We'll engage and consult with staff, board members, PAC members, and our municipal partners to identify policy themes and options that we'll then take forward for broader community and stakeholder consultation through a policy directions discussion paper. And we'll also consult more broadly on the results of the buffer width technical analysis. Following the consultation period over the summer, staff will report to the board in September on the results of our consultation and bring forward draft policies on priority areas for approval, interim to the final document being approved. And we'll work with the governance committee to identify those priority policy areas to focus on. We'll then report to the board again in November on the final policy document and procedural manual, recognizing that, again, additional amendments may be required following the release of the Section 28 regulation. With the input and advice from Karen, staff have laid out an ambitious plan to complete the remaining works. And to assist staff with delivering this important project this year, we will be retaining a consultant team to undertake the buffer width technical analysis and support the policy updates and procedural manual development. This project is important to address the gaps and inconsistencies within our policy document and provide the clear guidance and intent of implementation of our policies. We look forward to working with you all to strengthen our policies and processes. So thank you, and at this time, we can take any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Leilani and Karen, for your presentations. We'll do this in two parts. We'll first deal with any specific questions you may have to the presentation. Anybody has any specific comments on that, and then we'll bring forward the report to deal with it separately. So I see Mr. Halinga has his hand up. Member Halinga, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank Ms. Wayanecki for simplifying a very complex topic. I found the presentation very easy to follow, and the content to address what I was concerned with when I reviewed the procedures or the policy manual. And the Npca refers to it as a policy manual. And my observation as I went through it is I tended to consider it a combination policy and procedures manual, and that has also been expressed in the presentation, and how we need a separate procedures manual tied to the permitting responsibilities we have. So we need to have a procedure to allow the decisions on permitting. And I believe that that was the intent of what has been presented. So I guess I really don't have questions. I have the comments and the compliments, and I like the schedule. I think that that is going to allow this board to make the decisions that they feel they are responsible for, and to do so before the end of this term. So I think that I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Member Halinga. So this is the opportunity to be asking questions of the presentation. So I see our esteemed colleague from Hamilton has his hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're doing a marvelous job. I want to describe what I think is happening, and I want to hear from staff as to whether or not my interpretation is accurate. So this board has expressed and given direction to our staff in terms of our concerns about wetland offsetting, and our concerns about the size of the buffers, most noticeably 30 meters, a 30-meter buffer around a wetland. That, I guess, could be described, Mr. Chairman, as a philosophical statement from this board. This is where the board would like to be. And what I think this document is, or the proposed document as we move forward to developing it, is the document that our staff will use if they're ever called into a hearing to defend the decision of the Conservation Authority. So the policies will basically implement what the philosophical position of the board is, but the policies are written in such a manner that people can understand what they can and cannot do. But if there is someone who appeals a decision of our staff or the board, then this document is the document that it is used to defend the position of the authority. Does that make sense? Or
So I'm going to take you a step back, Member Clark. So
sure.
Would everybody be content if we actually put the report onto the floor? Because I think both yourself and others may want to be digging into that. So can I get Member Johnson to move that we put report FA 1022 onto the floor? Member Kaywell, would you second that for me, please?
And just to be clear, this is to put the report and the presentation combined because they're intertwined, correct?
Correct. Yes,
so we
that
can do
is
both.
correct.
Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah, because as Member Clark, I think they're distinctly intertwined. So
yeah,
thank you for yeah. Thank you. So you kind of pointed that out, Member Clark. So Chandra, any commentary back to Member Clark?
Oh, he's absolutely correct. I have no commentary. Thank you.
Wow, I haven't had an absolutely correct in a long time. I'm going to enjoy this weekend. Thank you, Chandra.
Has that ever happened on Hamilton Council, Member Johnson? No? Okay.
No, it has not happened on Hamilton Council. So I'm happy to listen to the rest of the concerns of the board. But if my understanding is correct, then we should continue to move down this road, and by August sometime we will have the policies that will actually defend us if someone disagrees with the position of the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. So I think this is a prudent step, and I know we'd like to get there faster. Some of us would like to get there faster, but it's been my experience, if you walk into a hearing and you don't have those policies written in paper, then the adjudicator or judge rarely will side with you. So I think this is a good course, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Member Clark. I have Member Hewson and then Member Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the member from Hamilton, Member Clark. I think this is, I think it's taken us time to get here. We had, I'm not sure a policy review and alignment was perhaps a priority for the previous board, and we had a lot of in-house matters to take care of before we could get at a point of inner reflection and look at this and devote the time and energy it needs to really review the policies and how things are changing. So I think, I know there's some impatience in moving this along, but I think this needs to be done properly. I just want to comment on, have some clarification, because I think there's a lot of perhaps misunderstanding around the Niagara's official plan and what's been approved, and maybe Miss Wienecke can just confirm this. The region did approve a natural environment system known as 3C. However, this is a draft policy, and this policy does not come into effect until our official plan has been approved by the province. Is that correct, Ms. Wienecke?
It may be more appropriate for Npca staff respond directly, but that is my understanding. Those policies, as I understand, remain draft, but perhaps I will turn the floor over to NPC. I don't speak on behalf of NPCA, and staff have been far more involved, in fairness, than I have with the region in reviewing those policies. But my understanding is that they do remain draft. But Leilani or David or Chandra, perhaps I could turn the floor over to you to confirm.
Leilani? Yeah. Leilani?
Yep. Thank you, Chandra. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is our understanding too, is the policies are in draft. The draft consolidated official plan was circulated to the Npca for review and comment. And on the agenda today is our comment letter on those draft policies, with particular focus on Section 3 related to the natural environment system. And we did provide commentary on areas where there is direct reference to our policies and highlighting to regional staff that we're undertaking this process. And it would be prudent to perhaps not make direct reference to our current policies, understanding that they will likely be subject to change. So those comments are also on the agenda today, and I hope you've had a chance to look at them, and we can answer any questions related to them at that time.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, I did know the answer to that question, but I really wanted everyone to hear that, because there is a misconception that, 3C was passed at the region and all of a sudden those are the new policies in effect, and that's not correct. But it is important for us to anticipate those changes and identify how our policies need to change to be aligned with the official plan when that comes into effect. So the other comment I wanted to make, or maybe this is a question for staff, is also as important in terms of reviewing, revising, and bringing this policy, updating this policy. I think it will also be important for us to have some type of policy review schedule, some type of cyclical schedule to make sure that, once this is finalized and updated, that we are regularly reviewing it on an ongoing basis, not in entirety, but certainly in sections. I think it's very standard to have something like this in place administratively. And I'm wondering, is that something that we're planning to incorporate? Yes, I'm getting a thumbs up.
I'm seeing nods. Yeah, I'm seeing nods from both the director and the CAO on that one. So
okay.
I believe the answer is yes.
Perfect. Okay, so that's an incredibly important part of where we land, and it will be an incredibly positive development for this organization and a responsible thing for this board to endorse. So thank you for the work, very important, and I appreciate that it's been brought forward today.
Great, thank you, Member Houston. Member Smith, and then I thought Member Wright, did you have your hand up as well to ask a question?
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Okay, so I'll go to Member Smith first and then to you, sir. So go ahead, Member Smith.
I can't hear Member Smith. Are you muted?
So far, you're not making much noise.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just for a point of clarification, are we only addressing questions in regard to the presenter at this time, or is it open now on the issue?
I have the report and the delegation presentation is both on the floor, so you may shoot at either one of those, Member Smith.
So I'd like to bring up just a general question then on the presenter. I think made a great point when on one of her slides where she talked about the need on buffers and recommendations, and I tried to scribble down the note as quickly as I could, but to summarize it, she was making a comment on the need for it to be grounded in science, which, by the way, I think we all agree that all of the Npca policies need to have a firm foundation in science and not in the whims of the board or the special sensitivities of any board member. So with that in mind, my question is on the need for public consultation. I don't understand when we are let's call us a science-driven institution. I agree with the need for public informing the public as we go along. But as I understand public consultation, it's going to slow down the process. And we're all sensitive of the time issue here because this board is running against the clock now to get these policies done. And my question is on the public consultation part and the need for it, given that we are science-based and we go where the science leads us, not where public opinion leads us.
Interesting question, Member Smith, and I'll go to the CAO if you have any comments on that, Chandra.
I really don't know where to start. I mean,
Member Smith, I got to tell you, it almost kind of surprises me you asked that question, and the reason is that the concept of openness and transparency is a critical component, and we've seen in the past what's happened when that hasn't been there. So I really don't think any circumvention of public consultation should be going on. My opinion. I certainly leave that to the remainder of committee, but it's a very interesting comment. So I'm right.
Well, then maybe I can add to it just for clarification, because I'm sensing that it wasn't understood in the way it was intended. Because I'm never against transparency and informing.
Yeah, I know.
It's the public should be kept aware of everything all along the way. But by saying we're consulting with the public, because don't forget, the public also means all stakeholders. So we shouldn't think that, developers may have a certain way they would like a rule to or a policy to be worded, and environmentalists may have another way that they would like it to be worded. But in the end, we need to be guided by the science, not by the pressures of the public. And that's my concern, is that I believe the science is what's going to, me being, I'm not afraid to identify myself as an environmentally sympathetic person. I believe the science will take us to good places. It is giving in to pressure that ends up with these gobbledygook policies that are full of loopholes that can be taken advantage of. And that's what we need. That's a pitfall we need to avoid and go with the science. That's what I'm trying to say. This is not against transparency. Keep everybody informed all the time, but we don't need opinions to guide our policies.
Okay, so Chandra, go ahead.
I can respond to that. When we do consultations, there's a range of stakeholders. There's landowners. As you know, we just finished one on the strategic plan. It doesn't take away from the groundedness in science aspect of our work. Secondly, similar to what the province is doing right now with regulations, the writing of the regulations is not up for the public to decide the verbiage of that, right? The intent is presented to the public and stakeholders in a guide in advance of writing the policy. So I want to assure Member Smith that it's not the policy verbiage or policy itself that the public is transcribing or telling us how to write. It's the intent of the policies in that guide, intent based on science and grounded in science and the realities of our watershed. And the consultation is also with academics. It's with municipal stakeholders. So you can't leave some out and consult with some. You have to be on the same page with all your stakeholders, and that's the intent. I understand your concern about delays. And if you've seen what we've done on the strategic plan, we deploy a whole range of tools. We deploy technology, and the way we have planned is, hopefully it's not going to delay. We'll do we'll carry out a very efficient and well-managed process on that. But I mean, it's dictated by Conservation Ontario, so we have to follow the rules. It's in our policy. It clearly details in our policy how any amendment or update should be followed. So we're just following the process.
If I can end with one final comment, and one of my concerns is, and I'm probably being repetitive, but when we get all these voices in a room, we start to hear words like balance and things like that. And those words tend to make their ways into the documents because we want to reflect what we heard. And so we hear these, what to some of us are the creations of loopholes unintentionally even. I'm not trying to ascribe intentional bad motives to anybody, but you have opposed forces in issues like this. And in all of our heritage as Canadians, we like to find a middle ground. And so words like balance and other soft words make their way into these documents and create unintended loopholes in the future. And that's all. I'll just leave it at that. The process will begin, and hopefully I know we'll end up in a much better spot than we're in now.
So thank you, Member Smith. And so I have Member Wright, then Johnson, then Shurton, then Kaywall. And I actually, I'm going to apologize to you, Member Smith. I let out a bit of a chuckle, and it wasn't intended to be directed at you. All I was thinking of at the time was that, oh my goodness, like as a politician, this is what I get all the time when it comes to issues. And when I'm sitting around the table, like there's always a lot of differing views that are coming into play. So that wasn't intended to be a knock on your comments, sir. So, Member Wright.
Thank you, Chair. My question is probably quite a bit simpler. Karen, you had mentioned that the buffers range quite a lot between the different CAs when you made the comparison. And I'm just wondering if you know which ones were based on science and which ones were not. I guess the question I ask that is because if there's such a range, how could the science actually dictate that? And I guess when it comes to the phase 2, will you be indicating when you do your comparison which ones were based on science and which ones were more arbitrary for instance, things like wetland buffers or whatever? That's my question. It's kind of coincidentally a little bit related to Member Smith's, but wasn't intentional. Thank you.
CAO Sharma, should we put that to Director Leilani, or do you wish to take it?
I can start, and I would like Leilani to address that. I just want to, I'm not going to answer the technical side of it, but I want to tell you, leading up to this stage, I've done a lot of consultation with other CAOs and Conservation Ontario on this matter. I took this to the Greater Golden Horseshoe Conservation Authority CAOs meeting and presented it to them. And everybody agreed that if NPCA led a technical study like this, everyone will benefit from it, including Conservation Ontario, and we'll do it together. So I mean, we have strong backing from the urbanizing conservation authorities, as well as Conservation Ontario behind this work. And over to Leilani now to address the rest of your question.
Thank you, Chandra, and through you, Mr. Chair. I would note that there's a large breadth of science behind buffer widths and the purpose of buffers, vegetated areas, and mitigating land uses, and also creating resiliency and improving ecological function to features. And you know, as a person who's worked with, you know, municipal and conservation authorities and looking at policy development and looking to the science, you also look at your local context your landscape, your natural heritage system, and what makes sense for you to achieve your objectives from a resource management perspective and a natural heritage system perspective. So while there may be variations in those buffers, there is science and a large, as I said, breadth of it and study in buffers that support those widths that the other conservation authorities has chosen. Where we're moving forward in our phase 2 is to take that work and bring it down to the Npca watershed jurisdiction level and identify what makes sense for us. Is 30 meters where it should land? Is there another buffer width particular to a particular feature based on what the guidance is and the context for us in our watershed? So yes, grounded in science, the buffer widths of other conservation authorities, but we want to take that more focused lens for our watershed.
Thank you. Member Wright, is that good?
Yes, just maybe one suggestion. It might be useful for information for the board when it comes to the phase 2 discussions to actually be able to identify what aspects of the scientific studies informed how the buffers, some buffers are 30 meters, for instance, some are 5, and what aspects of the science, what criteria actually swayed that buffer from, the different widths of the buffer, so that the board gets an understanding of how the science flows through to that buffer width.
Yeah,
I think that would be quite interesting and also informative on making a decision. Thank you.
Yep, I think I heard Leilani basically saying that's the approach she's thinking with that as well. So we have Member Johnson, then Member Shurton, and then Member Kaywell. Member Johnson.
Actually, I think Member Kaywell was ahead of me. I don't mind waiting if Member Kaywell wants to start.
Well, actually, Member Shurton was ahead of Member Kaywell, but we'll go.
Okay, well, go ahead. No, I can wait, sir.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that's fine. We'll just cut you off completely. Go ahead,
Yep,
Member
that's fine.
Shurton. Member Shurton.
I'm glad member, well, first of all, I want to thank Karen for a very professional speaking approach, very easy to follow, and you can see you've been doing it for a while. Great job there, Karen. And thanks, Member Clark, for opening up the can of worms. We know on this board we have some environmentalists to maybe some politicians that maybe are more on side with developers. I think if the science was black and white, well, I'm just saying the science isn't black and white. So I'm going to disagree with Member Smith on that aspect. And I think it's very necessary to have all public input because there is different views. Just look at other parts of a municipality or a provincial. There's always different interest groups trying to move their agenda. So I think you always have to take everything into account. And I know you don't want to hear this, but balance is important.
Okay, thank you, Member Shurton. Member Kaywell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen, for the presentation. One of your findings was that there's tremendous variation in the approach to policy and level of policy detail, both within the NPCA and across CAs in general. And while there may be lots of opinions on what the most appropriate policies are, would it be fair to conclude that what's most important are actually the outcomes of how those policies are applied? In other words, are the policies doing what they were intended to do?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me to respond through the chair to Member Kaywell, policies are statements of intent, right? They're designed and developed to achieve a series of objectives or outcomes. And I feel it's important to clarify, and I did say this at the outset, the work that I didn't look at those outcomes. In other words, it didn't look at the way in which those policies are being implemented. It simply looked at the way in which they are written on the page. And so for the average individual, what became apparent to me was that the level of policy detail was widely varied between the comparators. And for example, Conservation Halton has very finite, very discrete, very direct, very clear policies. That's not to say that's what works in that watershed. That's the approach that's been defined for that CA. Credit Valley, for example, whose policies are a little bit older, they're much more general. It's not to say that that's not right. That is what works, and that is what has been defined in that watershed. I didn't conclude, and I want to be also just want to, perhaps I misunderstood, but I didn't conclude that there were various levels of detail within the current NPCA document. What I found was that there was variation in the level of detail between the comparators. And in terms of policy outcomes, that's what you're looking for. It's, are you achieving the intent or the outcomes of those policies?
So thank you.
Yep, Member Kaywell, go ahead.
Yeah, you actually answered my question, which was going to be, did your scope of work involve looking at the outcomes of the policies? And I think what I heard you very clearly say was, no, that was not part of the scope, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
So when you talk about caveats, okay, and I think the way I understood it is caveats are a maybe not common practice, but certainly are a practice across CAs. Again, would it be fair to assume that caveats are more the exception than the rule?
Karen, do you want to try that, or CAO Sharma, whichever one prefers? Go ahead, Karen.
Through the chair to Member Kaywell, I wouldn't say that they're the exception. The work that I did, examining the policies for the 8 conservation authorities, I would not say they're the exception. I would say that in the vast majority of cases, policies are written, but there are specific conditions or exceptions that allow those policies to be considered based on local flexibility. And in virtually, I wouldn't say all, but in a good number of the comparators, those policy caveats exist.
Okay, I appreciate the answer. Can we just talk a little bit more about what was in your presentation? And you just mentioned again, this whole idea of a flexible approach to policy, okay? What does that mean, okay? Does that mean a range of environmental options that are available when applying the policy? Can you help me with what the word flexible means?
I think what you're asking is relates to the way in which those policies are being implemented. And I think it may be more appropriate for NPCA staff to answer that question. From my perspective, it doesn't mean that there are a range of environmental considerations that are taken into account. It's that there may be local circumstances that suggest that those, and we talked about them. We talked about slope and we talked about local conditions, etc., that allow those specific on-site matters to be taken into account and to be considered in detail. But Leilani, you may have some additional direction and thoughts in response.
Thank you, Karen, and through you, Mr. Chair. I would agree that it's the flexibility on how the policies are implemented, and that's where we do need more clarity and the need for the procedural manual. So if we do have policies that state, no reduction to the buffer except for specific circumstances that have to be justified through technical analysis and meeting a certain level of policy tests, the question is how. And that's where a procedural manual comes into place to clearly identify our expectations as the Conservation Authority and how that work needs to be carried out to what level and rigor, and how we then would make a decision on allowing that exception.
Okay, thank you, Leilani. But let me just follow on that. But could I therefore conclude that flexible does not mean considering the relative merits of economic considerations, social implications, and other non-environmental implications? Would that be a fair comment?
You want to take a shot at that, Leilani?
I will take a shot at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we need to take a look at each application on its own merit and context, and the request that comes forward. And we need to identify whether that's something that we could support through our policies or not. And, without knowing a specific example or the challenges staff may face in making that determination, that is the challenge we face, particularly as planners within the Conservation Authority world, and the pressure of growth within our watershed. And, not to use the term balance, but how do we sort of wade through those pressures to identify the best way forward that ensures we're protecting our watershed, achieving our objectives around climate change resiliency, looking for net gains, and really building a better system, while also considering the growth pressures that we're facing. So it's maybe a bit of a philosophical answer, Member K-Wall, difficult to give a straight answer without a particular context or application. But I would say, the intent of the policies are to guide us through that decision making.
Member K-Wall, my expectation is, and I know you and Member Smith also want to join the governance committee. I think an awful lot of these questions where you're going to will be discussed as some of these policy pieces start coming into play as they're being brought back in and through. Just a time check for everyone. It's 10:52, and I know we don't want to go till 4 this afternoon. So, Member K-Wall, anything else?
Yes, a couple more. So thank you very much. I look forward to that discussion because in my research, I can't find anything in the CA Act or Regulation 15506 that says conservation authorities, in particular our conservation authority, needs to take into consideration the relative merits of economic, social, or other implications when making decisions. But we'll leave that discussion for another time. I just want to go back to what Member Hewson was talking about because this speaks to the timeframes. Member Hewson, as I understand it, not to you, but as I understand it, the new official plan needs to be submitted to the province for their approval by July 1st. And so we're in the last 3 months of that, and I would suggest that the details in that plan, while draft at this stage, are probably as close to final as they will be. Included in that NES portion of the of the new official plan was the option 3C that you mentioned. Okay, and what's different between 3C and 3B were the buffers and linkages, specifically buffers inside of settlement areas. The Niagara region has already declared in that plan that their standard will be 30 meters for buffers around wetlands outside of settlement areas. And they have been very specific that they will not be prescribing buffers inside of settlement areas, that's the responsibility of the Npca. Okay? The challenge I think we have at the moment is that the region is going forward essentially with an official plan approved, not approved, but ready for approval as of July. And at this point in time, the Npca's policies around those buffers inside of settlement areas is not going to follow for about 6 months later. So I think the region is going to be a little bit anxious about, the natural environment system, I think, hangs on the policies that the NPCA is going to put in place, and yet they aren't going to happen for another 6 months or more.
Just
Which
Member Kaywell, just the thing with the official plan and when it goes in, just as an FYI, is it does not officially go into play until such time as the province has approved it. And there is a strong expectation that there's going to be at least a 6 to 8 month, considering there's an election that's going on and everything will be in complete disarray in Toronto as it's going on. So there is a buffer that comes into play, just to let you know with that, okay?
Yeah, appreciate that. So one of the things I am wondering, and I fully appreciate and absolutely support the need for a procedures manual in addition to the policy manual. Okay? And I know that the work plan intertwines those two. Is there any opportunity to separate the two? Okay, and just deal with the policy first and accelerate that time frame so that we are dealing with the approval of the policies, call it in the August-September time frame, and allow the work on the policy manual to follow later in the year.
CAO Sharma, any thoughts on that?
We've already considered that, but I'll ask Director Yates to answer.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The intention is we do run it concurrently. However, we have built into our program where there are those priority policies we'd like to advance quicker to bring those forward in September. And there may be opportunities within our timeline to allow for more focus on the policies and the procedural manual to kind of wrap up after. But with the consultation, we're hoping, we can hit that together with both of them so that we can expedite the process.
Thank you.
Okay,
Member
good.
Kaywell?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, that's it, Chair.
Great. Thanks, Ken. I have Member Johnson, then Member Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a comment than a question. It may end up being a question when I'm all done. I just wanted to remind everybody, we as a board and staff knew that we needed to do a very fulsome and solid review of these policies. We also know we couldn't accomplish these changes just on the back of a napkin. So Karen, thank you so much for your review. Thank you so much for bringing it together in a very comprehensive presentation, because you just confirmed everything that we always suspected. I also appreciate the fact that the process has to be set out in front of us. It has to be solid. As Chandra has reaffirmed that with Conservation Ontario, that if it's not solid, if it's not covering all our bases, as Councillor Clark said, or Member Clark said, we want to be ensured to give our staff the correct tools, solid tools to go into court, with the science and with all the policies that are put in place in a proper fashion. So just out of interest, and I heard the last comment from our Director of Watershed Planning, that we are going to expedite certain policies to go to the forefront, because we are doing the low-hanging fruit, but we're also doing the ones that need to conform to the official plans for all three municipalities. So just my question would be, if our policies are stricter or more lax than the official plan, where does that set the staff when they go to court? Does it give them more leeway, or does it make them vulnerable? Or is it best that our policies line up?
Chandra?
Leilani will have a better answer, having been in front of OMB several times. Go ahead, Leilani. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to Planning Act application reviews, we are a commenting agency unless we do have an MOU in place with our municipal partners to review certain aspects related to natural heritage. And we also have the delegated authority under 3.1 of the PPS to look at natural hazards. So definitely with that respect, it's important that our hazard policies are in line and consistent with the PPS, and so should the municipal official plan policies. And where it comes to the natural heritage component, as Karen identified, our current document doesn't wade into those areas where it's, you know, specifically under the jurisdiction of the municipality or other levels of government, and whether we need to recognize that in the role that we play as a commenting agency, service provider, resource management agency in making those comments. You know, in my experience, we always want to ensure that, you know, us and our municipal partners are on the same page going into a tribunal hearing, and the close collaboration, even from the onset, from a pre-consultation, looking what the issues are and ensuring that we have a clear understanding moving forward on where the conservation authorities' interests lie, and where the municipal interests lie, and where there's that commonality in working together. So from our, you know, Section 28 regulatory perspective in our policies, they don't necessarily have to be in conformity or consistent with the municipal official plan policies. But what we want to do is take a look at where the upper tier municipalities have been going with their current official plan reviews, and to the best of our ability, make sure that there is consideration of that commonality and consistency moving forward. And I think where we've clearly identified the need to focus is on buffers and looking at the compensation policy and having the fulsome consultation on that with our municipal partners.
Thank you very much for that. And through you, Chair, one last question. You spoke about your experience, and I've seen your resume. In your professional opinion, is the process that's been laid out for us today, in your professional opinion, are you in full agreement?
I'm hoping you're asking Leilani that, not me. So Leilani, go ahead.
Well, no, never you. No, I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
Yes, absolutely. We've taken a look at the Conservation Authority guidelines, my experience in policy development from both the Conservation Authority world and municipal world. The consultation component is critical, and we do need to understand what the public interest is related to our policies and ensure moving forward that we address those, but also keep in mind our objectives as an organization and where we want to be in the future and our long-term policies and goals.
Thank you. And thanks for your answers. I really appreciate it. And Karen, thanks again. The presentation was wonderful.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Member Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to congratulate everybody on something that's been long overdue, and I think that the end result will be just a wonderful turnout, and our ability to be able to actually manage things in a more systematic way. In terms of the science, I agree with Member Smith. I think that as a member of the governance committee, we'll probably have lots to say about that as these things come forward to our committee. So I'll reserve my comments to that time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodhouse. So we have the motion for this report, and also the presentation to be received in front of us and have been duly moved and seconded. So is there anyone opposed to us accepting the recommendations of the report and receiving the presentation? Seeing none. Karen and Leilani, thank you very much. Excellent work. And we very much appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. You got an applause from Member Johnson. I'm going to take a quick step back on some earlier items. Number one, Chair's update. This morning, all I really wanted to do was make mention of the passing of our friend Mickey DeFusio out of Thorold. Of course, he has been on our foundation committee for this term, and boy, talk about a defender of the monarch butterfly and the people that have followed him in and around. There's 8 different municipalities that have gardens that he's had effect on. Over 12,000 wildflowers, huge amount of space. 2 more gardens are being planted for 2022 for him. So anyway, a long and storied member of both the Npca and the foundation, and you know, he is going to be missed. Member Woodhouse, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was mayor 1,000 years ago, I was the first guy to put Mickey on this board, and I've worked with him ever since, and obviously admired and respected everything he's done. It goes without saying. I just wanted to share a brief story. Mickey became very ill for a period of time, and I was able to talk to him, and in usual Mickey fashion, his conversation centered around some demand of me, and his comment was simply about the trees that are along St. David's Road that go onto the Brock property where the new Canada Games facilities are being built. And he impressed on me the importance of keeping those trees. He said, Mel, whatever you do, make sure they don't cut those damn trees down. So Mickey was that kind of guy, and he's going to be, you know, very much missed. And I just enjoyed him tremendously. So we'll continue on with his legacy for certain. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Mel. Just to let you guys know, the chair's update, what I'll be doing with it is trying to bring everyone up to date on any items that have gone on that I've had to deal with as the chair, or John has had to deal with as the vice chair, and also if Chandra has any items that we've had to work together on. The other piece of the puzzle with the chair's update, when we get questions from particular members, for example, we had a very good discussion, Member Smith and Chandra and Leilani and I the other day. What I'll be doing is making sure that there's notes going out to everyone on those particular meetings, simply because they are quite fascinating, and usually it results in some additional information that's of value to everyone as it's going on. But anyway, that's the intention, and I'm hoping to follow through with that. Go ahead, Member Houston.
Thank you, Chair. Can I also ask that when you're attending the Conservation Ontario, we get kind of a brief update as to the major concerns discussed?
Yep,
just to keep us in the loop.
Yep, good idea. Do I have to attend that, Chandra? Yes, I guess I do. Yeah, okay. So, Member Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I'm wondering if this is the appropriate time for me to ask under the chair's update. 3 months ago, we as a board sent a letter to the Canada Summer Games regarding their bike slope on or bike trail on the slopes of 12 Mile Creek, asking for discussion, and there's been no response back that I'm aware of. So I'm wondering if this is the time in the chair's update to.
Well, typically it wouldn't be, but I'm okay for today. Dealing with it. Normally it would come in under other business at the end of the meeting, but
okay, I can wait. That's fine.
Yeah. No, that's okay. We'll deal with it. To Chandra, any comments on that?
No, I have responded to Member Smith earlier that if I hear anything, he'll be the first one to know. But certainly, Chair Foster, we can, us can follow up on that if needed.
Okay. Thank you.
So.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Member Smith.
So with that in mind, yes, and absolutely, Chandra had advised me of that. I'm wondering, it's been 3 months. We as a board sent a letter to Canada Summer Games, which they have not responded to. I'm wondering what next. And I did hear Chandra or someone, I'm not sure it was Chandra or you, that said, well, we'll follow up on it. But what does that mean? What does that look like?
So let me, both Chandra and I will take that away, and we will touch base with those that this was sent to, and see if we are going to get a reply. Okay.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
okay. Consent items. We have 3 items of consent. No, sorry, I got to back up here. Sorry, we have 3 items of correspondence this morning that have come in. And I want to take it as a block, although people can ask questions to specific of these items if they wish. So, Member Clark, would you please move that we receive these 3 reports and Member Shurton would, yeah, and Member Shurton, would you second that? Great. So questions to these particular pieces of correspondence, and remember they are correspondence. So I have Member K-Wall and Member Houston.
Thank you, Chair. So as I've read through Ms. Manson's correspondence, I think it would probably be helpful for both this board and to respond to her to understand whether the wetland buffer policies are working as expected. So my request is to ask the CAO whether you could provide a report for us at the next fixed authority meeting on all NPCA approved development applications that involve wetland buffers around PSWs. Specifically, of all the approved applications, how many were approved with 30-meter buffers and how many with less than 30-meter buffers? And for those with less than 30-meter buffers, what was the average buffer size and what was the smallest buffer approved? And if you could do that for the calendar years 2019, 2020, and 2021, I think that would be great. That would inform everybody on how well the wetland buffer policies are working and should allay Ms. Manson's concerns and anybody else that may be concerned about this issue.
So
would you be able to provide such a report?
So Member K-Wall, there's a fair significant amount of work I think is going to have to go into this. So, and I'm not one that typically wants to just drop by direction onto staff with that amount of work. So my preference would be for you to move a motion and have someone second it, and then and requesting this information and have it come back when staff are able to get it prepared, hopefully for our next meeting, but if not possible for the one after that. So would you be willing to so move such a motion?
Absolutely, and
Yep.
in anticipation of that, let me just. I can't see. I wanted to put it in the yeah, it's in the chat feature.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
yes, Chair, quite happy to move the motion that's in the chat. So.
Yep. Do I have a seconder for that particular motion? I see a member in Grail wishes to second that. To the CAO, is it clear the what it is through this that is requested?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to finish off this particular motion unless somebody wishes to speak to it. Oh, Member Johnson, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a, before we go to the vote, I really'd like to ask the CAO. Chandra, how much work do you think this is going to cause our staff when they're in the middle of working on permits right now?
I mean, every time you ask us to do something new, it is a lot of work, but don't forget, you're also wanting us to expedite policies. And
right.
I'm telling you, the 4 of us, along with Karen, we've worked like 2 weeks, double the time to get this to this stage, and everything takes time. Also, don't forget, a lot of planning, historical planning applications going through FOIs, and community wants information, and all of that takes time. So along with our day-to-day work, we are taking a huge workload right now as we rebuild the organization. So if members, I can understand the request, I can understand the desire to know that. I don't know how that information is going to help going forward. So this is
I
digging into
agree.
the past. So I mean, we can sit here and dig into the past forever. We can do that, or we can move forward. I cannot estimate how much time it will be, but just so you know, we have a very small team of staff working on planning matters, and there's no additional support that helps us dig through this information. So the same people who are going to be working on policy, writing the terms of reference, will be now digging this information. So this is all I have to say, but I'll take the direction of the board. If you want me to do that,
Thank you,
I'll do that.
Chandra. No,
Yeah.
thank you. And quite frankly, folks, I'm not prepared to send our staff on an investigation track that's basically not going to solve anything, because once all the sorry, we just finished listening to a presentation, and the process that's been set out in place, it's not fast enough for some people. And now we're going to bombard our staff with more work, and that's going to slow the process from the initial presentation that we just saw. So I am not in favor of this at this point in time. I'm all for transparency. If somebody wants to FOI it, go right ahead. But I'll be honest with you, I'm not prepared to support it at this time. I think this is just putting undue work on our staff that we've just sent them on a journey to put some policies in place that's going to help the buffers. It's going to help the development go forward in a very environmental way. Sorry, folks, I simply can't support this.
Yep, thank you, Member Johnson. Member Metcalf.
I believe Member Hughes first.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Member Houston.
I actually had something to discuss before we ended up on a motion, so please go ahead, Member Metcalf.
Yeah. Go ahead, Member Metcalf. This is to this motion that's in front of us at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is, Chair Foster. From what I read, I believe that Mr. DeLuce's explanation to Mrs. Manson's request, or the response from Mr. DeLuce, covered quite a bit of her concerns, and also with what we're working on now with the new policy review expedited as well. I think that should be sufficient, rather than going back into the archives and finding things that aren't going to change anyway. I'm kind of in the mindset of Member Johnson as well, that we can't unring those bells, but moving forward, we can certainly put policies into place, which is going to happen. So just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Metcalf. Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask, I'm trying to understand the motive. What's the member trying to get at by moving this motion?
Member Kaywell, can you, in a sentence or two, what are you really after with this?
Yeah, so the implication in Ms. Manson's letters is that our policies are lenient. Yeah? And as the policy is stated right now, it is 30-meter buffers around wetlands with some exceptions. So if we claim to be a data-driven organization, let's put the data out there and see if most applications are getting approved at 30 meters, or whether most of them are getting approved with less than 30 meters. Okay? Our CAO has told us that these policies are working appropriately. So I'm assuming that the answer is most applications are getting approved with 30 meters, and that the ones less than 30 meters will be the exceptions, or few and based on specific cases.
Okay.
If that's the case,
no, that's okay.
then,
That's good. You've answered the question, Member Kaywell. Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the answer to the question. I guess when I'm looking at this motion and what the intentions are, I'm trying to prioritize. I know we do not have. We're not a wealthy CA. We don't have a lot of staff available, and I think the board's priority, or intended priority, is to get the policies approved before the end of this term. And I think we should be having all of our efforts on that. And if this is going to take our staff away from that, even if it's only for a short period of time, it's going to slow our process down. And I don't want to find ourselves here in September. And I'm not in Niagara, so I won't face the voters of Niagara, but you don't want to be going to the polls without having your policies that you've talked about for 4 years actually approved at the Conservation Authority. So anything that's going to slow that process down, I'm a little bit nervous about, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member Clark. Member Fior.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I agree with the sentiment that Member Johnson brought forth, and others as well, that we are strapped for resources with respect to staff time. I know that they have a lot of work to do in the phase 2, and it doesn't necessarily mean looking at every single item between 2019 and 2021, but is it possible that there is going to be some review of applications within the phase 2 work plan, not necessarily to be presented at the next meeting? I don't think that timeline is fair to staff or feasible, but I'm wondering, is there any information that is going to be brought forth through the phase 2 work plan and maybe presented in the engagement session? And then what can we do going forward to ensure that there is a report of this sort going forward that can be integrated into the responsibility of a staff member? But again, I want to be really mindful of the fact that staff are seem to be overburdened at this time, and we do want to get this policy, but we don't want to ignore the request for information, but we need to do it in a way that works for everyone, and the timeline in the motion before us just does not seem feasible or fair.
Okay, thank you. Member Woodhouse. Can't hear you yet. Still can't hear you.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
I thank you. I don't want to disagree with the objective of what this motion is, but I think there's a time and a place for all these things, and our prioritization of our efforts should take precedent over this. I too share that interest and that understanding of what this motion is talking about. But I think we have to be responsible in terms of where we're going. Once our policies are in place, then, and it's based on science, as we talked about earlier, Member Smith, it seems to me then these things can be brought forward as part of a report, even an update report from time to time from the CAO if there are any anomalies to that direction and the reasons for those anomalies, rather than a whole-blown review. So I'll be voting against it. Thank you.
I agree. I withdraw.
Oh, okay. So your seconder has been withdrawn. Does anybody wish to second the motion?
I will second the motion.
Okay, Member Smith will second the motion.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to comment as to why I think it's important.
Sure.
I'm also not interested in dragging up old ghosts or ringing that bell again, or whatever the saying is. However, as I heard in today's meeting, as we at the governance committee start dealing with this new policy document, there is going to be the voices that are going to want to lead us away from science and into terms like balance and economic interests and things like that. So this is a dialogue that we are entering now as a board, as what is the Npca and what are our policies and our intentions. Paramount in that discussion to me is a reflection of what have our present policies enabled, and is that what we want to be going forward? And so this will help us identify, in fact, what does those terms of balance and economic interest and et cetera, what does that actually enable? What does that look like in the field? Right now, we don't know. We can all talk and speculate. Maybe the timeline is off. I would agree with that, and I would ask Member Kewal if he would accept that this report just be included as part of the reports going to the governance committee as the dialogue begins in full.
Okay, we'll leave that as a sidebar with the thing. I don't see anybody else with any questions at this point or commentary. So,
Sorry, Chair Foster, I didn't have the opportunity to actually speak to the motion, so.
Oh, well, okay, you have, but go ahead anyway.
Okay, thank you. So we claim to be an evidence-based organization, okay? So this is an opportunity to actually put forward the evidence and settle down an argument that's been going on for quite a while. I don't see why we wouldn't do that. Secondly, we're about to undertake a very large buffer review, okay? If the results of this tell us our policies around wetland buffers are working as we anticipated, one may be able to scope that buffer review down. Okay, it may not need to be as extensive as it's probably contemplated right now. Okay. And thirdly, with respect to the workload, we on a regular basis get updates from staff on the number of different applications that have been processed by municipality, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that information, I'm assuming, is coming from a database of some kind. So the request to actually go into that database and pull out this information, I can't expect that that's a huge amount of work. That information is all there already, and it should be able to be assembled pretty quickly. At the end of the day, we're asking for 4 numbers to be produced. Okay, so I'm hoping that consideration will be given to this. I think it's a really important piece of evidence to come forward, and will guide some of those future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Kaywall. So what I would like to do is turn to Mr. Bivol. Given that this is going to be a split vote of some variety, can you do a recorded vote on this? Because I don't want to have to be counting up checks on the screen. So Grant, could you take it away?
Well, certainly can. Would you like me to read the motion out loud once again?
Certainly.
Okay. We have that staff be directed to present a report at the next full authority meeting on all development applications processed between January 1st, 2019 and December 31st, 2021 involving PSW buffers, identifying how many were approved with 30-meter buffers and how many with less than 30-meter buffers. And for those with less than 30-meter buffers, what was the average buffer size and what was the smallest approved buffer?
I believe that's correct.
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Point of order. I had requested or suggested an amendment removing the timeline for the next FA meeting and to be amended, for the motion to be amended to say that that report be available for the governance committee when it starts dealing with these issues. I'm wondering if Member Kaywall would see that as a friendly amendment and if the motion could be amended accordingly.
Member Kaywall? We don't have, I think you're saying yes, I think it's great, but I'm oh, there you go.
Yes. Yes, I'm okay with that. Maybe it says at the presented at the next governance committee meeting.
Yep, that's fine. So, and you're seconding in that, Member Smith. So, I believe that's a friendly amendment. So,
I think Chandra has some input as well. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Next governance committee meeting is next week.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it'd be to a governance committee meeting in the future, correct?
So when we deal with buffers, the issue of buffers, the study we are launching, we can certainly produce that information as part of that and bring it to the governance committee. That's acceptable. Yeah.
Okay. To the motion, Member Woodhouse.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to speak to the amendment, but given what I just heard, I will pass.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Bivol, can you please take the vote?
Most certainly. The motion is as we just.
Sorry, Chair, can I just get clarification?
Yes.
The CAO just mentioned something she's bringing to governance. So is something already in development that is coming to governments that this request can be incorporated into? Is that what I just heard?
Yeah.
So what, if I may, Chair, through you?
Yep.
So what you saw on the work plan is a buffer study. So we'll be hiring a consultant to undertake a scientific study of buffers in the Npca watersheds. That will be used, the evidence-based approach, to determine what policies we will use going forward. So as part of that work, we can take a look at how our policies are working, what we need to put in the procedural manual. Additionally, Director Yates has said she will be developing a wetland process guidance. So those are the kind of things we are already working on, and we'll be taking a look at those items. Yeah.
And just as a follow-up, Chair, and the date that you were planning to bring that forward to governance?
Leilani?
With the technical analysis for the buffer width work, we're anticipating perhaps July for a final report to feed into public consultation and policy development. The wetland procedure document we would like to take forward in May. And we can discuss whether at that time there's any metrics that we can report on. It will take our staff a little bit of time. We do have a database that tracks our applications, but it doesn't specifically track a metric on the decisions on PSW buffers or decisions on reduction to buffers. So that is going to be a bit more of a manual process to pull that information together. At the board's wish, we could either try to report on some of that in May or include it in the overall buffer analysis when we move forward with an anticipated timeline of July to bring that forward to the governance committee.
Okay, so then this motion is in effect kind of fast tracking that work. Is that correct? No?
I think. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think it would be fast tracking the overall buffer width technical work that we want to do. But if this is a particular component of the research you wish to have earlier, that component would be fast tracked a little bit, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So no, let's go to the vote, please, people. We've been banging around at this one for half an hour now. So, Grant, can you please take the vote, please?
Sure. So we're looking for a vote from Member Beatty.
I can't hear the.
We didn't hear you, Grant. Can you try again?
Grant, are you in a silo today?
I don't know what it is. We're looking for a recorded vote from Member Beatty.
No.
And Member Clark.
Opposed, thank you.
Member Cridland.
Opposed to fast tracking, thank you.
Member Fior.
Opposed to fast tracking.
Member Foster.
Oh, I'm chair, so I go last.
Sorry, my apologies. Member Halinga. Member Halinga.
In favor?
Member Houston.
Opposed.
Member Ingrail.
Opposed.
Member Johnson.
Opposed, thank you.
Member Kwal.
In favor.
Member Metcalf.
Opposed.
Member Rapley.
In favor.
Member Shurton.
Opposed.
Member Smith.
Yes.
Member Woodhouse.
Opposed.
Member Wright.
Opposed. I'm not in favor of fast tracking.
And back to Member Foster.
I'm opposed as well. So thank you. So that motion was defeated. We're back into the discussions going on with these particular reports. And by the way, one of the things that I plan on doing as chair is direction to staff is one thing, and particularly when direction is kind of given and it's expected that it's going to be done. The problem is that, and I think was shown by the discussion around this, there's a significant amount of work goes into play, and it will affect other areas that we're dealing with. So I think it's appropriate that members be prepared to have motions coming forward if they want additional pieces of the puzzle, because we do have staff have to go through an awful lot of things, and as was mentioned by many. So Member Hewson and then Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. So I also have a question regarding Ms. Mason's letter, and there's reference to an interest for the Merritt Road extension, which is of significant interest to my community. I've tried to keep very informed on this because my community is very interested in the outcome and how it's developed. So my question is, have we sent comments to the region regarding this project?
Through yes, through you, Chair Foster, to Member Hewson. Yes, our team has met with the region a few times. We have sent a letter to the region on this matter. We have expressed some concerns regarding the hazards related to flooding, as well as the PSW located in that area. And I will ask if there's any further specifics. I'll ask Director Yates, who's leading with staff on this one.
So thank you for that update. My next question is, are you aware if the region has posted that or made it public in any way?
I'm not aware. Leilani, are you aware, Director Yates, that if our comments are posted anywhere?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I did check the region's project website, and I did not see our comments posted there, but I'm not aware of staff's, any internal processes with reporting to regional council on this project, and if our comments were incorporated.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I'm going to ask if, can I be circulated the comment, or can the board be circulated the comments? Is this something that it's not confidential that we can share with the board so they're informed of what we've made recommendations on, similar to what we've seen in terms of the official plan today?
Through you, Chair Foster, ideally, I think our comments should be part of the public record, but if that's the board direction, we have nothing to, it's eventually going to be public record. We can share it with the board members.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my final question is, are we aware if any other conservation authorities have a policy of making their comments public? Because my concern is, if the region chose not to share this information, it would be private, and I think it really should be public. So I'm just wondering, are you aware of any conservation authorities that actually have a policy in regards to their comments?
I can start, and I'll ask Director Yates to comment. I was aware that when I was at the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, we posted our comments on major policy issues on ERO, like when we commented on that online for public consumption. I'm not aware of any specific environmental assessments or smaller projects, infrastructure projects like that, because it's considered a technical team and technical review. Director Yates, would you like to further comment on that, how, in your opinion, it was done?
Thank you, and through the chair, the typical process when we are commenting on Planning Act or environmental assessment applications that are municipal led, as the commenting body, we take the lead from the municipality on how they are reporting out to their council and to the public. I don't know of any conservation authorities specifically who say have project pages where they report their comments on applications. It's typically collated by the municipality when there's a public meeting, or when they're responding to public comments and documented, like say in a comment response matrix, and the responses back at the time of reporting to their council. If there's a wish of the board to see these particular comments, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I would give a courtesy heads up to the municipality and to their team to let them know. But we have been working with them through our comments, as Chandra noted, particularly with the PSW and the extension from Cataract to Rice Road. There's an unopened road allowance, but it would be an extension of the road proper, which would have impact on the PSW, as well as there's floodplain hazards there. So we have been working with the regional team and Wood as their consultant for additional monitoring, water balance, hydrology studies, floodplain hazard assessments, and mapping to better understand what the impacts would be on those regulated features and areas. And we haven't concluded that work yet. It's still in the process, and regional staff are working to respond to a last set of reply to information that they've provided to us. But in terms of our official letter that commented on the alternative designs, I wouldn't have issue sharing that.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess maybe one of my concerns is that, if we're sharing comments on public projects funded with taxpayer dollars, that there should be some transparency on that. And it's certainly not a criticism here, but I'm wondering if there's value in our governance committee discussing, if we want to have some type of public posting of our comments, because I really think it should be available to the public, or even councillors who represent the town in which the project is happening, because I'd like to have factual information available for my residents when I respond to them on projects such as this. So can I refer that to governance for consideration? Certainly no timeline or urgency in that.
May we take that away as a comment? I want to discuss this a little further with the CAO. I can tell you with my long history of planning, there's a wide variety of things that go into play in and around commentary from the NPCA. So this may be not quite as simple as this is being made out to be. So we'll have a discussion, and hopefully it'll go on to the governance committee in the second one after this. Okay.
Sorry, can I just get clarification on that? Are you saying that as chair, you might decide not to put it on the governance agenda?
No, I did not say that. What I said is I'm going to have a discussion with the CAO, and if she feels it should go on to the governance committee, then she can, unless you directly want to say it must go on it. So your choice, Member Houston.
I've asked that it be forwarded to governance for consideration.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure that we have all of we will make sure that we have all of the I's dotted and T's crossed with it, because as I said, this is not quite as simple as what it's being made out to be. Member Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Member Houston really has covered off my comments, but I do support this discussion happening at governance. While there are times where comments that we are providing or comments that we plan to provide in a hearing setting or something like that, we need to make sure that our comments that are confidential do not go out to the public.
Exactly.
So we need to break that down for sure. And I think that's what the chair is getting to in terms of, there are some planning issues from time to time that when we're in the beginning of that process, our comments prudently should not be made public. But on all other general issues, I think if we got to a point where we had it just happens by design that when we make a comment on something, it goes up onto a web page and it indicates our comment on this particular project or provincial policy. And I know we've been doing that transparently by releasing them to the public, but I don't think we're compiling them as we go along, and I don't think we should go backwards, but on a go forward basis, that's something that we should most definitely consider. So I would support Member Houston's referral of that item to the governance committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Member Clark, and to Member Houston as well. No, I'm not stifling the discussion. What I do want to make sure with this, however, is that we have all of the differing scenarios on the table to make sure everybody knows and understands what actually goes on with planning items that come back in and through. Having been involved with many confidential things over the years on the planning side of things, you know, one must make sure that things are not released to the public that that are inappropriate. So, but I'm sure Chandra and Leilani can come back with an appropriate report to the governance committee. Okay, so is that it for correspondence? That took a little longer than I thought. All those in favor of us receiving this, I guess, or anybody against us receiving these documents? And I do not hear anyone. We have 3 consent items. By the way, we're at 11:44. I'm really sorry. Johnson should be in the chair at this point because she always got these meetings done in whippersnapper time. I'm just learning, I guess. The consent items. So we have 3 consent items this morning. Member Ingrao, would you move that we accept the consent items? And Member Smith, would you second this for us, please? Are there any questions to any of these reports? I'm assuming you have a leftover hand, Member Clark?
Yes, that's the way of putting it. It's a leftover hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is anyone against us having these 3 consent items? Seeing none, our next discussion item is report number FA0422, the Wainfleet Bog Advisory Committee membership appointments. And I believe it was circulated to everybody that one of our members would like to be a member of that particular committee. Member Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to at this time just ensure that we nominate Member Halenga to be on this committee.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Metcalf, would you second that? Member?
Most certainly, that's why my hand was up. I would.
Yep.
Sadly,
I thought so.
second the motion.
Yep. Okay. Member Halenga, now that we're actually doing that, would you, are you willing to put your name forward? Just to absolutely confirm. There he is. I have talked to him, so if he doesn't get back online here. Okay. Yeah, he's not there. Unfortunately, he's not able to get in. So let's go with the report saying that he wishes to do that. So is there any other questions on this report? Seeing none. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. It's just Member Cridlin. I just wanted to acknowledge as well that Member Halenga has put his name forward, and as the Wainfleet member, it's great to see what he's going to be able to bring to the table and all the credentials. So really happy to support this appointment myself as well from Wainfleet.
Great. Thank you, Member Cridlin. So is anyone against us receiving this report as amended? Seeing none, let us move on to our next item, which is report number FA0722, which is the Npca climate change update. Can I have Member Houston move this and Member Fior second it? And so it's on the table. So Member Fior, please go ahead.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I just wanted to extend congratulations and thanks to Chandra and her team for this hard work. I'm greatly appreciative of it.
Great. Thank you, Member Fior. I completely agree. Anyone else have any comments on this? Seeing none, is there anyone against us approving this report? I see none. So let us move into our committee reports. And we have one committee report, which is the minutes of the Public Advisory Committee meeting dated February 24th, 2022. And we will be receiving that. So can I have Member Smith move that we receive that? And Member Rapley, would you please second that? Are there any questions to the minutes? Seeing none, is anyone against us receiving these minutes? I do not see anybody against that. And I've already gone, the governance committee. So under motions, a motion to appoint an additional member to the governance committee. I know Councillor sorry, I've taken you down a notch, Ken. Member K-Wall and Member Smith have both expressed their interest in being on the governance committee. So here, let me just get to the thing. Is there anyone else interested in being on that committee as well?
Mr. Chairman, am I on that committee? I don't know anymore.
I think you are, but
I thought I was, but I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
If I'm not, I would like to be, and if I am, I'll stay.
Yeah. Grant, can you let us know? I believe, and I hope Councillor or Member Clark is on the committee.
So Member Clark is not actually on the governance committee. Yeah, I'm aware that he wanted to, or it was suggested that he be appointed as well. I don't believe you were at the annual general meeting, so we didn't get you into that motion. However, under item number 10, I did prepare a draft motion in the agenda to appoint him as requested by another member, and I understand there are two.
So can Mr. Bival, can we have the motion so that it approves Member Clark, Member K-Wall, and Member Smith as members of the governance committee?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't mind joining as well if there's room. If there's too many, then I'd pass.
Member Wright?
Yes.
You know, the more the merrier, I guess, is the way we look at. I believe there's no fixed amount of people that are expected to be on that committee. And it is a good, by the way, committee work is perfect to be having the big discussions, particularly around policy and everything else. And I see Member Halinga's got his hand up. Go ahead, Jack.
Okay, yes, like Member Clark, but I don't have to sit as a voting member. I would like to be notified of the meeting dates so I can sit in on the meetings.
That's a fair request. All of us, I believe, and through to Mr. Bival, I believe we're all informed of every one of the governance and finance meetings that do come up.
Certainly, they're on the calendars. We haven't sent invites to non-members, but we can begin doing that if Member Halinga would like to be on that or advise of that committee.
Is that okay, Jack?
Yes, a notification with a link to the web meeting is ideal. Thank you.
Yeah, and I suspect there may be a few people who want to sit in on some of the policy meetings. So, so for the motion right now, we're officially appointing Member Clark, Member K-Wall, and Member Smith onto the committee. And of course, it's always going to be available. And I believe Member Woodhouse, you are on the committee, but go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little worried about this, that if we're going to have other people coming and going in and out of various committees, what involvement would they have, if any, and you know, in terms of voting, the movement, or the discussion around it? Do they play a part in this, or are they simply observers? Because if they're just observers, I have no problem with that. My problem lies in with trying to move the agenda forward when you add more and more people who all have opinions on a specific subject. Thank you.
For sure. For sure. Well, that's maybe we need to go to the governance committee and see how we're going to handle this.
Mr. Chair, if I may pipe in, I believe our administrative bylaw at some point will allow non-appointed members to participate in the meetings, just not to vote. So they can attend, they can issue comment, but they are not allowed to vote.
Yeah.
Members appointed by resolution would be allowed to vote.
Okay. So basically, anyone can attend the meeting, and as a member, they are allowed to ask a question. If it's likely, what we do at the region is if you're not on the committee, you're one of the last to speak, and other members of the committee go first, and we can just generally follow that rule, I think, with what it is that we're doing. So, does that sound okay, Mr. Bivol?
That is perfect.
Okay. So, so we have the three members that are wishing to be on. So, Member Ingrayo, would you move that we accept, do that motion for those three additional people? And Member Woodhouse, would you please second that? Great. Anyone against that? I don't know about that Clark guy, but anyway, I think everybody is okay with this.
So sorry, Rob, it's Ken. Just a point of clarification. You mentioned three and their four names. So.
Oh, no. Who's the fourth?
Ryan Wright.
Only three.
Oh, I'm sorry, Member Wright as well. I'm very, very sorry, Member Wright. I do apologize. Do you wish to be a voting member?
Maybe I'll pass. I'll do the same as Jack Halinga, Member Halinga, and just if I could get the notifications and the meeting notes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So I accidentally screwed up okay with that, Ken. So, okay, let us go back to our agenda. Is there any, there's no notices of motion for the meeting today. New business, CAO update. Chandra, please go ahead. Can't hear you, Chandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Foster. Won't take much time. Just want to brief the board members on the COVID pandemic activities at the Npca. We are continuing to apply our COVID protocols internally to ensure staff feel safe, including social distancing, masking where unable to distance within the workplace. Our vaccination policy continues to be in effect with 97% of our current workforce fully vaccinated. We have adjusted some of our COVID-related practices for third-party programs and events in line with the provincial guidelines. And we're finalizing details of our return to work and office plan to allow for a hybrid work structure where desired with the target date of mid April for staff and May for members of the public at our administrative offices. We are also able to accommodate in-person board meetings going forward with board cooperation and continuing to adhere to our COVID protocols and vaccination policy. So we are, with that, getting ready to see if we can host the April meeting in person in a hybrid fashion at the Elgin Room at Balls Falls. So that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Chandra. Any questions for Chandra? I do not see anybody with their hand up. Oh, Member Johnson.
Yeah, can somebody please let Member Shurton know that last bit, please? Thanks.
I'm on it. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Is there anybody else with any new business today? I'll just do a quick update on the foundation, and we'll be figuring out how we're going to be bringing this information back in and through in the future. So we're looking at doing some sort of a meet and greet event late in April. We'll be providing additional information on that. The second part is that we have been moving forward with the foundation, with the with our new fundraising initiative, and more information will be coming back at our next board meeting to the Npca. Short and simple. Member Johnson.
Yeah, just asking if you are now the chair, do we need to also add one more person onto the foundation, or are we satisfying that requirement?
That's a really good question. Chandra, who do we have as the persons going over there?
So through you, Chair Foster, at the last meeting at the AGM of the board, we appointed Member Hewson as your replacement, and Member Cridland went back again. So we have the chair attending the meeting in the capacity as Conservation Authority Chair, and Member Hewson and Member Cridland as board appointed members.
Oh, thank you,
Great.
CAO. I wasn't chair at that portion of the meeting, so I didn't pay any attention. Okay, thank you.
Well, the other piece of the puzzle is that I'm currently the secretary treasurer on the thing. So members Cridland and Hewson, you're going to be having some people coming at you about additional jobs, but we will just leave it at that. We'll wait for our foundation meeting. So with that, there's no closed session because we've already dealt with the closed session item. So with that, let's adjourn this meeting. And I did get it in under 12 o'clock. So there we go. Thanks, everybody.